Okay, we are recording. You might get a message on your screen saying that this is being recorded. But welcome, everyone. I know there's a question about making sure we know who the participants are, and I have not done that yet. So I will do my best to go back and look at this recording and pull that out of Zoom. So I will try very hard. There's 30 people so far, and I will do my best to do that. But in any event, welcome and thank you so much for joining us tonight for this community animal welfare best practices presentation. My name is Dr. Sarah Pisano, and I'm the founder of Team Shelter USA. I'm part of the Maddie's Million Pet Challenge and the Open Door Veterinary Collective, and you're going to hear about two of those things. My colleague Cameron Moore will be watching the chat. She's from the University of Florida and my consult partner on most projects, although she hasn't been in yours. I want to start out with a shout out to Judge Becerra and the selection committee who chose Team Shelter and Animal Arts for the feasibility study for your community. And I am not kidding when I say this is truly the most exciting project that I've been involved with in my career, and I've been doing this for 30 years. So I'm going to go over basic best practices that we know work everywhere. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the feasibility study and what we've learned so far, because we will have recommendations, but of course, your judge and counsel and commissioners will have the final vote on actually what happens, but you will be needed. So if you are not muted, please mute and make sure that your video is off. Somebody is not on mute. So this presentation is being recorded, and in the next day or two, I will get it up on my YouTube channel, and it will be shared on the Facebook page for the Hays County Animal Advocates. And we will put this presentation on the Facebook page, as well as any answers to questions that we don't get to. I did my best to incorporate the answers to your questions, and then Cameron will be answering questions in the chat and answering the questions, asking me the questions first and foremost that you sent ahead of time. So we want to prioritize those. So as far as Team Shelter, and actually Cameron and I started doing assessments back in 2013. We've now done over 115 in 25 states. We have lots in Texas for sure. And what we found was no matter where we were helping shelters, municipal shelters that were struggling for a variety of reasons, no matter where we were, urban, rural, high poverty rates, low poverty rates, the challenges empirically that we all face in animal welfare are the same. And the good news is the solutions are all the same. So Animal Arts is joining me in this amazing adventure with this feasibility study. So it's Team Shelter USA and Animal Arts. If you're not familiar with Animal Arts, Heather Lewis is one of the principals and partners. This is the premier shelter design and architectural firm that builds the most beautiful shelters. So you all had a lot of questions about, will the new shelter be temperature controlled? And the answer is yes. And Animal Arts is cutting edge. We are fear-free. We always design with the animals in mind, and certainly staff and volunteers. But if you are not familiar with Animal Arts, please look them up. It's animalarts.com, and you can see some really, really beautiful work. But in any event, like I said, Cameron and I have been doing assessments since 2013, and we didn't make up any of these recommendations. We just are using the core recommendations that we all agree on in the animal welfare industry. If everybody could just please mute, just because it's distracting to hear background noise, that would be wonderful. Thank you. So we use these core recommendations, and First and foremost is the Association of Shelter Veterinarians Guidelines to Standards of Care in Animal Shelters and Spay-Neuter Programs, and certainly fear-free. If you have not heard about the Human Animal Support Services, that is really a compilation of not just best practices, but all kinds of great information. If you had a question about an adoption contract and what people are doing around the country, there's toolkits on the website, humananimalsupportservices.org, on any topic that you could possibly imagine. So as a result of seeing the same themes over and over with respect to the challenges and the solutions, I published the best practice playbook that's there on the right back in 2018, I want to say, or 19. So that's available on Amazon if you're interested, but it is a spoiler alert. If you want to know what I will be recommending for Hays County, it's all in the playbook, no secrets. Humananimalsupportservices.org is the website that I encourage you to visit because so much changed. I feel like Human Animal Support Services, or HAS, is the playbook come to life. But HAS started right at the beginning of the pandemic when we didn't know what was going to happen. And so many hundreds of us got together and formed this coalition. And it's now just a great think tank and reservoir for all these amazing resources. So back in 2013, ironically, Waco, Texas was our very first assessment with Target Zero. And some of you, that might sound familiar because back in 2019, our colleague, Dr. Mike Greenberg, actually put together a presentation from Target Zero. So Cameron and I were part of the ones who started that consult process. What you're looking at here in Waco, Texas, and back then in 2011, 2012, the poverty rate in the city of Waco was almost 30%. So very high poverty rate, just like you see in the city of San Marcos. And the green is the number of animals who left alive, and the blue is the number of animals who were euthanized. So in the very first year with us, which was 12-13, we got there at the end of 2012, look at the dramatic decrease in intake. Well, it's a reflection of intake. There's other animals too, but these are the outcomes: live release and euthanasia. But look at that dramatic decrease. And that's because pets might have been helped in different ways, or maybe they weren't born because this was targeted spay-neuter. So great progress in Waco, and they're just doing wonderful right now. So one thing I will ask of all of you, which I remind myself of daily, is that we are a product of our own microcosm. And that means our human brains have been exposed to all different kinds of things, and we are unique to ourselves because our beliefs, our experiences, our education, where we grew up, what the environment was like in our home, all of those things make up our microcosm of how we see, interpret, and perceive the world. What we also want to remember is the human brain automatically triggers and, most importantly, amplifies the negative worst case scenario. And we see this over and over and over. We see that these fears of a negative outcome block life-saving in animal welfare. And I'll give you an example. If you're a staff or volunteer and you're working in intake, you might have 100 amazing experiences, and one person is super mean and it was a horrible experience. That is the one that you're going to think about for the next 24 hours or longer. And instead of those 100 that good experiences that you had. If everybody could mute, that would be really great. If somebody has their sound still on. So we want to think about things differently. I might say things this evening that you think are crazy. I promise you, back, I've been doing this more than 30 years. I promise you that I thought a lot differently back then as well. So just please have an open mind and consider there might be something to what I'm saying. But for any shelter, rescue group, municipality, all of us, we have to use our resources as strategically as possible. And resources are not just money. Resources might be shelter space, their staff, their human capital, there are partnerships. And in animal welfare, we tend to say we don't have a big enough shelter, we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough funding, but we don't usually say, let's see, what do we have and how can we use that most strategically? The other very important piece of the whole animal welfare system is what is in our control. And holy cow, that is most everything is in our control. Our public policy, when we educate our elected officials and municipal leaders appropriately, we can effectively create public policy that makes sense instead of takes us further away from our goals. So we have much more in our control than we don't. But unfortunately, we inherited this traditional, very flawed animal welfare system whereby there's very minimal barriers to come into the shelter, but there are a whole heck of a lot of barriers to get animals out alive. Maybe it's a stray hold that's not productive. Maybe it's a behavior test. Maybe it's a spay neuter. Maybe it's ... But this is the typical system. Sorry about that. And the problem with that is when an animal enters the shelter, it's extremely stressful for them. It evokes fear, anxiety, stress, frustration. It's unnatural. They don't know where they are, what's going to happen. There's no routine. It smells weird. Dogs are barking, cats are crying. It's stressful for animals and people. And when we have a longer length of stay, we then will get overcrowded. Then we can't house animals humanely. There's more disease. We have decreased life-saving potential. And like I alluded to before, we have a reactive use and waste of our resources. So we have to make sure that we are working in our shelters within capacity so that we can provide that fear-free environment for pets. If you have not heard about Fear Free, I also want to mention at the end of the presentation, I have all the links to the things that I'm talking about if they're not throughout the presentation. So fearfreesheltering.com is at the end, in the last slide, but your organization can sign up and do this online self-paced training for free. If your whole organization is not certified, go home tonight, get on the computer after this presentation. Please, please, please get certified because it is crucial for everybody to understand what animals are feeling in confinement and what we can do to help their time be more peaceful. But I always say the best fear-free thing we can do for animals is keep them out of the shelter. So your shelter in San Marcos does a lot of triage admission, which I'm so happy to see. And that means that we're looking for other ways to help animals besides taking them into the shelter. Sometimes it is appropriate to take them into the shelter. They might be injured. They need medical care. Maybe they're an enforcement case and we need to work them up for something. But we have so many other opportunities to help animals. So please remember, and this, by the way, doesn't mean that rescue groups are overburdened. This means we're looking at this whole wide net of how we can help animals. Is it a Good Samaritan? Is it the finder? So we have a foster finder program. Is it a community cat that never needed to come into the shelter, just needed to be sterilized and put back where they were already found? So the point is to look at all those other solutions so that I'm more selective about my space. The shelter is hallowed ground and there is finite space, and we want to make sure we're using it in the most productive way possible and then removing barriers to live outcome. That's how we balance the formula of capacity for care. So the first piece of that, and your shelter is very much a victim of a shelter who does not have the authority over all the field services. So you have multiple jurisdictions with different ordinances. So number one, and I've already redlined all the ordinances, I've met with all the city leaders and meeting with some of the attorneys and recommending revising public policy so that it's your local ordinances. So first of all, they have to be in line with state statutes. And we want them to focus on public and animal safety and be in line with best practices, but not have unnecessary barriers to life saving. So it's important that all municipalities have updated public policies. So I'm excited to help work on those things. And you all need to be a part of that and really educate your elected officials about these revisions. And there'll be posts on your Hays County Animal Advocates page on Facebook. So you'll learn when these things are happening. But boy, those provisions for community cats, Cameron and I probably spend most of our time working on ordinances or about those community cat programs I'm going to talk about. But in any event, we see lots of issues that are common themes in our public policy, like pet limits or breed restrictions. We definitely want to see no stray hold for cats, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit, or puppies, and then incentives to sterilize. When somebody comes to reclaim their pet, we want to make sure that there's an incentive for them to sterilize and vaccinate them, so it's cheaper than the fees and fines. We were in a shelter in Georgia once, and right off the bat, if you went to reclaim your dog, you got a $500 citation. I mean, how many people do you really think are going to reclaim their dog? There weren't that many. So we want to eliminate those unnecessary barriers to live outcome. The next way we think about this whole system is what's happening in the field. So our animal control officers, are they trying to help the community, or are they trying to take animals to the shelter and giving people citations? And I love the example in Santa Cruz County, California. They just said, we're just tired of going to the same neighborhoods, dealing with the same people. So how about we rotate and we just, dumb it down. We don't have like our enforcement uniform on, and we see what people need. And they took all of those high intake areas into low intake areas. There was a question sent ahead of time about this topic. And the answer is yes, we want our officers to be equipped with safety net resources, or actually be doing safety net would be great too, if there's enough staff, but we'll get to that again. We're going to come back to that theme. But certainly we want our officers to work really hard to get those dogs back to their homes when they're right in their neighborhoods. And I am going to tell you, we have brand new studies coming out and research coming out from not just Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, right around you, that are showing that dogs are less than 0.4 of a mile from their homes when they get picked up by an animal control officer. So we want to keep dogs in their neighborhoods so that we can get them home. They're probably on a walkabout and they're not lost. Then we have to think about, well, with safety net, what can our officers carry in their vehicles or resources that they can give out to people? And the truth is that most of our enforcement issues are actually lack of access to care. And that's the piece that we've been missing. So what's happening in our communities is really important. And targeted spay neuter is one of those key strategies that we know correlates to decreasing intake. But listen, I know your community is very much lacking in spay neuter. You do not have a high volume spay neuter clinic. We are recommending that the county, as part of this feasibility study, we are recommending a high volume spay neuter clinic. It is desperately needed here, but I'm going to show you too that it can be done through a network of private practice veterinarians, and you could hit the numbers that you need to hit. So Peter Marsh's research showed that if you did 5 to 10 in a high poverty rate city like San Marcos, you would want to do 10 subsidized surgeries per 1,000 people, your shelter intake will go down, as it will when you do these other targeted groups. So logistics, funding, there was questions sent ahead of time, like who pays for what. And you know what? It's the old fashioned way. It's public-private partnerships. If everybody could mute, that would be really helpful. So there's a microphone on your screen that says mute, and there's a little arrow. So if you hit that arrow, it will mute your sound. Thank you so much. It's a great investment for municipalities to invest in targeted spay neuter because it decreases enforcement calls and decreases shelter intake. So this is Jacksonville, Florida. This is the spay neuter clinic where Cameron started out, but you can see this long line, this green line going up is all the targeted spay neuter, and the lines going down are intake and euthanasia. So look at that graph. And in a direct inverse correlation. Look at Waco, Texas. It looks remarkably the same because of ABC Spay Neuter Clinic. Here in Huntsville, the reason I have Huntsville in there now, Huntsville's line is this orange line on the bottom. It doesn't go straight up. Why? Because they don't have consistent high volume spay neuter clinics. All of those surgeries were done by a network of private practice veterinarians. And so their intake at the shelter did go from over 10,000 to under 5,000, but it took a little bit longer. So you always want to hit those numbers, 5 or 10 per 1,000. I'm going to just stop for a second and see if there's a way that I could mute everybody.
Sarah, if you click on participants, I think it's Miss Jane Houston who's not muted. I think she's the only one, and I can't mute her. So, but you could.
Yeah, my participants aren't coming up, but Mayor Houston, how are you? I'm so happy you're joining us. You mute, please mute. Let's see. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way here. Hold the phone. Oh boy. Oh my gosh. I'm going haywire here. Give me 1 second because my all right. So thank you, Mayor. So we talked about targeted spay neuter. Here's another thing we're recommending for the county, and what we think is the best use of resources is to do one shelter and one other building on the same campus that's a combination high volume spay neuter clinic and access to care. Open Door Veterinary Collective is our new nonprofit. It just started last year. However, there were 4 founders of these 2 test hospitals. One is in Toledo, Ohio, and one is in Asheville, North Carolina. They said, we think that we can have a profitable, financially sustainable, regular LLC veterinary hospital and enhance access to care. And so they created this model, and part of it is financial support options, but the clinic gets paid for all their work. The financial support options help people in ways other than something like Care Credit, which is incredibly expensive and one of those programs that really take advantage of people with no or poor credit. So this could be a for-profit clinic. Any of your veterinarians in Hays County can do this. We would love to talk to your veterinarians, and I'll be sending out a letter to them so that they know about this model, and it's not about them seeing more clients. It's about helping their existing clients get what their pets need. So it's opendoorconsults.org if you want to read more about it. On the on the Haas blog, our article about Open Door just came out a few minutes ago. I didn't even have time to put it on here, but I'm going to make myself a note to add that article link to this presentation so that you have it. Really incredible model. We now are training 20 or 30 other clinics around the country. And I personally believe this has to be the future of veterinary medicine. Remember, there's only a couple of thousand nonprofit clinics, but there's over 30,000 private practices. So we really need to be part of the fabric of the veterinary practices. So all of those things I'm talking about have to do with decreased intake. There were questions about community. How do we raise money to help people with medical issues? And Open Door is one of them, but it is always going to be a big puzzle. And the Open Door Clinic also involves maybe support from nonprofits as well in little pieces. The next part is about free roaming cats. And if Cameron and I had a nickel for every time somebody said, you don't understand, we're here in Texas, it's really warm, we have a lot of cats here. Well, we're here to tell you here and everywhere else, because cats are the most brilliant reproducers, I think, on the planet. There's a lot of free roaming cats everywhere. Dr. Hurley and Dr. Levy just published this article in Frontiers. The link is further down in the presentation, but I want you to just check out. These are the blue in the United States, 55 million cats just hanging out, getting fed by people, but nobody really says it's their cats. And then another 26 million cat owners who give their cats access to the outside. And then look at that yellow sliver. That is the number of cats going into shelters. And then last year, 364,000 cats died in shelters, twice as many as dogs, by the way. So it makes no sense and serves no purpose to bring healthy cats who are outside into a shelter. And here's why. And very few of them are feral. Most of them are socialized and friendly. A very small percent are unsocialized and feral, but boy, when they reproduce and are in colonies, that's what's in everybody's head, right? But half of Americans let their cats outside. Don't ask me why. We've trained the public to take those outside cats to the shelter because they must be lost. It's the craziest thing I ever heard. So now that we have data, and we're more mature in the animal welfare industry, we are here to tell you that here and across the country, less than 2% of stray cats that go into the shelter are reunited with their families. So we have this gargantuan foundational policy that is part of our public policies in many counties, including some of your municipalities, that mandate a 3-day stray hold for a 98% failure rate. So boy, do we need to rethink that process. So Dr. Hurley says, whatever we do, it can't be less effective than what we've already been doing. But we call it the super highway for cats. We don't want cats to go into the shelter at all, unless it's just for their spay-neuter path. But mostly we want this all done through TNR. But if you're able and you have capacity, which in San Marcos at the shelter, you don't have capacity now. And we hopefully will engage lots more vets in your community to ramp up your spay-neuter program. But the idea is that we want to sterilize these cats, rabies vaccinate them, ear tip them, and just put them back where they were already cared for. I thought this was the craziest thing I ever heard in my life. When Cameron started doing this in 2008, I was like, I don't know who's feeding them. I'm not putting them back. But then I had an epiphany several years later, thinking about a 12-pound cat saying to me, like, look at me, I'm 12 pounds. I have a healthy body coat. Why do you think that I'm not cared for. I know exactly where my 5 homes are. I have everybody snowed under. They think they change my collar all the time because they think I'm their cat. So we put them right back where they were found. And that actually reduces enforcement complaints, reduces complaints around cats when we sterilize them in that neighborhood, prevents colonies. Yes, sometimes there's reasons why we can't put them back. So that's why we have our working cat programs, our barn cat programs, but we better make sure those are quick pathways so that there is minimal housing, because for unsocialized cats, you might as well torture them by keeping them in the shelter. It is terrifying for them. And by the way, normal cats don't, I mean, friendly cats, I shouldn't say that. Friendly cats don't like being in the shelter too much either. When Best Friends looked at about 300,000 of these cats that went through a variety of programs, including the one in Jacksonville, they found that less than 1% that came in for spay neuter were too sick, ill, or injured to put back. So for kittens, they're so much easier to adopt out. If they're unsocialized and they're plump and healthy, we want to put them back because we're less likely to be able to socialize them. And there are so many kittens that need help. Because you all have not had a lot of spay neuter opportunity here, you have gargantuan kitten intake numbers at your shelter. As you do more and more targeted spay neuter, the kitten number is going to go down. And one day, mark my words, you're going to say, can't believe we ran out of kittens. So if you have room in your adoption area and they're healthy kittens, you can get them out fast. That's fine. Put them in your adoption area, but then don't forget, they're at risk of URI, Pan-LUC, and all of those things. So you better make sure they're in and out like a day or two to their permanent home. Otherwise, they should go back too. So trap neuter return, SNR, which is shelter neuter return, really benefits everyone. It is the fiscally responsible plan for municipal shelters, for private shelters. If you take a cat out of their home location to remove it, everyone else is reproducing behind that who's left behind, and voila, they have larger litters. So we do a worse thing by removing those cats. This provides sustainable resolution. It increases community immunity against rabies. It decreases the negative effect on wildlife. We have a shelter in California that decreased enforcement complaints by 90%. Are you just kidding me? One of our shelters, when we started, they were handling about 1,000 cats a year. Last year, they took in 19 cats. I know it sounds insane, but they helped all those cats in different ways. So they're going to actually be highlighted tomorrow on the Haas call if anybody is on the Zoom call. So just to give you an idea, again, the green is live outcome. The blue is euthanasia. This is way back when we started in El Paso, and you can see the large number that was euthanized, the blue part, and the green is live outcome. And Ariel, would you mind turning your camera off, please? Mute, thank you. And let me just go back. So these are, sorry about that. These are all, well, they're the same. Oh my gosh, sorry. I'm not sure what the heck is going on with my pointer here. Okay, so what you can see is a very sharp decrease in intake when community cat programs are started, decrease in euthanasia, and your shelter in San Marcos has done a remarkable job reducing the number of animals euthanized. But because the municipalities are bringing in healthy cats, it clogs the system. You have way too many barn cat, working cats that you don't have outlets for. So they're being held longer and it's not fair to them. And again, that system does not work. So I'm again so happy that I've been able to meet with the municipalities and talk about this and talk about updating ordinances. So you can see that all the trends, we could sit here all day long and look at these trends. In Greenville, South Carolina, this is the first year we started the program or recommended the program for them. First year out of the gate, 2,000 less cats went in the shelter. And you know what that was so remarkable is because it was budget neutral. Those cats, instead of going to the shelter, went across the parking lot to their spay neuter clinic and got sterilized and put back. Half of the people, 750 people, said, yes, I'll pick up the cat and put it back. The balance was 1,500 from the public, 500 from ACOs. So the ACOs put back the rest of the cats, but you can see what happens the next year. It continued to go down. So that was 2017 that I had this graph made, or Cameron probably made it. And probably a year or 2 years ago, I was in Greenville for a wedding, and this guy was the only cat in adoptions. One cat. When we were there back here in 2015, he didn't have a portal because they had too many cats. So really exciting progress. Here's Nashville. You can see boom, increase in the life-saving and decrease in intake. But mostly I wanted you to see the decrease in intake, because I know your euthanasia numbers are right, but for the shelter, for the cats, for the staff, for the volunteers, let's stop wasting everybody's resources and put the cats back. Let's figure out a pathway for spay neuter and how they can get back. Again, these links that you're going to get this presentation on the Facebook page. That YouTube webinar is one we did, Dr. Hurley, Cameron, and I. We did in 2020, but it's a great summary webinar. If you wanted to share it with somebody, we had a question about what do you do when people don't agree with this program? And guess what? I was one of them. I thought it was crazy. And the research, the successful examples, the studies, it's overwhelmingly the right thing to do. And it resolves constituent complaints. And so it sounds counterintuitive, but how if the question is, how do we change ordinances? It's giving our municipal leaders the data to prove it's the best thing to do. Now that Frontiers Veterinary Science Journal, that's the link to the article that just came out that I showed you, that pie graph. So make sure you read that article. It's amazing. So what I would love to see in Hays County, there are so many of you already doing awesome community cat work. So it would be so great if everybody got together, if the municipality said, okay, we agree, we don't want to deal with community cats, but we need to have a place where people can go, a resource. So it would be great if everybody could get together, figure out how resources can be strategized and put together. Maybe it's a hotline so that they don't go through the enforcement track. We see a lot of municipal funding for spay neuter because we convince the leaders that it is in their best interest. But really, funding is the old-fashioned way: grants, donations, co-pays, if people can pay a co-pay. You can have buying cooperatives. Somebody else asked about that. So the goal is, if they go to the shelter, it's only for spay neuter. But they come in as a surgery, so they're not subject to the 3-day stray hold. I also had a question about chips. We don't, if you have your own community cat, certainly I would chip all of mine. But if you're talking about high volume programs, there's some programs like they got a grant for $30,000 to do chips, but they never had another chipped cat back. They just didn't see them. And the thing is, they could have taken that $30,000 and sterilized a whole heck of a lot of cats. So if you have endless money, go for it. But if you don't, we would highly suggest that your limited funding goes to spay neuter, because that's how we're going to help the most cats. We do not agree with registration of colonies. It is an enforcement action that has nothing to do with compliance with spay neuter with really there's no reason for it. So it's the access to spay neuter, it's being a respectful neighbor, a respectful feeder, if you're feeding your cat outside or you're feeding groups of cats. But truly, this program is to prevent colonies. But in no way do we ever see registration as being anything useful. Excuse me one second. And I know one of your ordinances has registration, but I'm recommending to remove that. So when we talk about coordinated triage intake, I did want to mention Memphis, Tennessee, because they have a remarkable director, a remarkable mayor, and he said to the director, do whatever you think. So the director, Alexis Pugh, said, well, you know, if we take an animal into the shelter, it costs $309. Why don't we help that person? And we know we could do it up to $300. Maybe they need a fence repair. Maybe they need medical care, whatever it is. If they needed some financial assistance, let's help them, because it's better for the pets to stay with their owners who love them, and it's better for the shelter. It's better for everyone. So that's what they do. And so when we help people and pets in ways other than shelter intake, then we decrease our intake so the pets that do come in the shelter can have a fear-free environment. They can have staff time, enrichment, play groups, all of those things. So I was with a lot of people who thought that if you left an animal in a shelter, that you just didn't care. So in 2015, the ASPCA came out with a study that showed 80% of the pet owners who surrendered to shelters did not want to, they just didn't have temporary access to resources that they needed. So when we say to that person who loves their pet, what can we do to help you keep your pet or place your pet? It changes everything for them, for their pet, for the staff, for the volunteers, for rescue groups who are desperately trying to help save animals. When we asked the sheriff in Brevard County to do this, they had one person in intake, and they thought, again, we were crazy. And we said, listen, if you just help 30% of the owner surrenders, that would be amazing. But look what they do every year since then, year 1 to now, year 5, 80% of the owner surrenders are helped in other ways. I think your shelter's doing a good job of this because your owner surrender rate is actually really low. So our biggest problem is those community cats and kittens, of course, because of the lack of spay neuter capacity, and of course, large dogs. So we have a lot of great ways to help people. Home to Home is a direct placement site. Adopt a Pet Rehome is already recommended by the San Marcos shelter. And then there's all kinds of regional things too. Dogs on Deployment is one for veterans or military who need help with foster care. So make sure you unearth all of those opportunities to, again, maybe it's crisis foster care somebody needs. In Jacksonville, this is going back a few years, they had euthanized, most of the animals, but fast forward to a time that they did not euthanize for space anymore. And they were on the brink of being overcrowded and at risk of having to euthanize for space. So when that happened, you can see the year before that happened, they sent 456 pets to foster care. And as this was unfolding, they said to their community, please help us. We don't want to euthanize animals. And so look what they did in 1 year. 3,774 went to foster with 2 coordinators and highly organized. And I also should mention, though, that the city of Jacksonville Humane Society, they have mega adoption events. They have a very nice live outcome stream. So it's not like those pets got stuck in foster. Maddie says that most animals that go into foster get adopted by their fosters or through their fosters. So that's our ultimate goal. And then, of course, teaching people that they should not kidnap the kittens if they're doing well, and how to recognize. And we always tell people, don't reinvent the wheel. Hannah Shaw, Kitten Lady, is the best of the best. And so I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. If you're not, check her out. She has every possible resource about kittens that you could imagine. So I just spent a lot of time talking about everything but shelter, right? Because that is the most important thing, keeping animals out of shelters, because once they enter, we're all behind the 8 ball. We want to concentrate on the shortest length of stay possible. The moment they come into the shelter, we want to be advocating for them. We want to be on social media doing tons of outreach. We want to make sure that our public who's visiting can see everybody in the shelter, except enforcement cases, dangerous dogs, etc. But we want to make sure everybody gets posted on intake with a great picture, and that we have foster volunteers and rescue partners on deck, first come, first serve, to get them out of the shelter. And by the way, I'm sure all of you have received the urgent pleas, but the shelter is very much overcrowded with dogs and puppies, the most beautiful puppies and dogs I've seen, such a gorgeous variety. So if you haven't spread out that need to your social media networks, please do that tonight, because there's just one beauty after the next at the shelter right now, really overcrowded. So what is non-negotiable when they enter the shelter, and what we can't do when we're overcrowded, is enrichment. So we have to have double compartment housing. We had a question about the new shelter. Will it be temperature controlled? I promise you it will be state of the art, temperature controlled. We believe in indoor outdoor runs for dogs, because the fresh air is the most keeps them the healthiest, but the inside will be temperature controlled, and there are all kinds of fancy ways that can happen. But toys, interactive things for them to do. And it's hard to see this cat cage, but that's a portal, so that they have their litter on one side, their food, water, and bed on the other. So very, very important that we do everything we can to prevent boredom. But there is nothing on the planet for shelter dogs that can help them more, the short length of stay while they're in the shelter, more than play groups. And the links or the websites to Dogs Playing for Life and Shelter Play Group Alliance are at the end of this presentation. But play groups, I'm amazed that you can put 10 or 15 large dogs in a play group, and you learn how to read body language, and everybody gets along. You have an occasional scuffle, but it is amazing. Decreases stress hormones for 24 hours. One study showed decreases the length of stay and increases adoption rates. And this is a great way. And here's the other thing that happens, which early in my career, I didn't realize. When I walked into a shelter and everybody was barking like crazy, I thought, oh, well, it's a shelter. Of course, they're barking. And then I went to a shelter who had play groups and who were doing enrichment right. And it was silent. And they said, no, the dogs are tired because they're so exhausted from playing in play group. And it was silent in the kennels. And it just about broke my heart in two, because I just thought it was a normal reaction, and it is a normal reaction to stress. But play groups, and if there's volunteers on this call, please be part of the playgroup movement. We've talked to the shelter about getting the training, and these groups are used to training all kinds of staff and volunteers. And there's some shelters where playgroups are just run by volunteers. So please, if that's something that sounds fun to you, please reach out to the shelter, or keep tabs on when that might happen. And it's tough when you don't have a veterinarian. I was reading today that for every 18 job openings, there's one veterinarian. So your shelter is advertising for a full-time veterinarian, but it is incredibly difficult. So you have a surgeon once a a week. And then if there's medical needs, they go to the shelter, to a private practice veterinarian. So daily rounds are super important in the shelter to just make sure everybody has a plan of action. We know like everybody is on track for the shortest length of stay. That's super important that all the teams in the shelter coordinate. And then listen, all of us agree, we absolutely want every pet that leaves a shelter to be sterilized, who's large enough for a shelter. However, with your spay neuter capacity, the number of animals coming in, that might not always be possible. So we are recommending for shelters that if you don't have that spay neuter capacity, do not increase the length of stay, like a week. Like if they had to wait for that once a week surgery spot, please send them on foster to adopt. We also know, and they sign a contract and then they come back for their spay neuter appointment or send you proof, what have you, but please don't keep them in the shelter longer than they have to. If you haven't read Adopters Welcome, this is the guidelines from the Humane Society of the United States that truly changed my whole perspective and opinions on adoptions. And I used to think, boy, I better charge a high adoption fee because I want to make sure those people are serious. And guess what? It doesn't correlate. So this is on animalsheltering.org. It's called Adopters Welcome. You could read it tonight for free or print the PDF or buy the hard copy for $15. But I'm telling you, it's every rescue shelter, doesn't matter, municipal or private. This will help you release the judgment and bias that blocks life saving. So please, please read Adopters Welcome. And then last but not least, such an important pathway to life saving is our rescue partnerships and our transport partnerships. We firmly believe it should be first come, first serve so that we can get everybody out in the shortest length of stay. There need to be mutually beneficial SOPs, a mutually beneficial partnership with open and kind communication. And communication can be really difficult when there's so many animals, there's so many people wanting information, but yet there's only one person or a half a staff person doing that communication. So thinking about other tools that might be used for communicating and getting those needs out. Foster space is something that you might be able to use with rescue as well. Maddie's Pet Assistant is helpful for scheduling things. So use technology to help with that communication, because I think that is an area of great frustration. But you can assume if you're a rescue partner, like every animal needs to get out quickly. So if they're there longer than 2 weeks, like try to focus on the ones that have been there the longest because and of course, if you can get more out, that's great. But the longer they're in the shelter, remember that list of the negative sequela that it evokes more anxiety for them to stay the longer that they stay. So a lot of you, I'm sure, are very curious about the feasibility study. Again, I can't say thank you enough to the selection committee and to Judge Becerra for having us do this study. And the questions asked of us are, what should the county build in light of the dramatic, obviously Hays County is the #1 growing, fastest growing county in the whole country right now. So where should a facility be built? What services should be involved? And how can we serve underserved pets and people and pet owners? And so what we are looking at, and obviously we've just been here this week, so we are just sort of having these conversations, but what we've talked about so far is having that combination high volume spay neuter clinic and open door access to care clinic on the same campus as the shelter, but that the services would be married to human social services, because we know 29 million pets have owners who are on government assistance. And guess what? Research shows that those are the pets that are ending up in shelters. So the judge had an amazing idea to also put on that campus a clinic or a social services building for people. So how amazing would this be? This would be the first of its type in the country. And I also should mention at our Open Door Clinic in Toledo, Ohio, we have a graduate student in social services that helps with our clients and with our staff, because we're all suffering from compassion fatigue. So that would just be amazing. So yes, all those proactive services would be part of it. And that leaves our field enforcement teams to just deal with the very small percentage of animals who are true victims of cruelty, neglect, and true abandonment. I had a question I just want to mention about abandonment and community cats. And it is not to put that cat back where they were already cared for, is not within the definition of abandonments. You don't have to worry about that. But if you're relocating the cat, that should be coordinated with a person. But if you're putting them right back where they were already found, then you don't have to worry about them being abandoned. That is not the definition of or intention of that law. So our feasibility study will be done early June, and we have been invited back. It looks like June 21st, which is not 100% confirmed, but almost confirmed, that we will be giving a presentation to your county court and in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I was asked, or at 7 p.m., I was asked to speak to the Kyle City Council. So when these things happen, I want to encourage you and anybody who cares about anything that I'm saying, you must attend the council meetings where these votes are. Your elected officials get a lot of information thrown at them from all different directions. When they go to vote, they need to see, and what you could do is, hey, everybody wear white shirts who want to support animal welfare or want to support this program that the county is recommending. Wear the same color shirts. So you're an easy visual to see for your council and your commissioners, but your community support and input is desperately needed and wanted. So please make sure you stay tuned to the Facebook page. So here's all the references and resources that I was alluding to, and I am going to ask Cameron. We have questions that were sent in ahead of time. So Cameron, I did my best to answer all the questions, but if I left anything out, why don't you ask me some questions?
Sounds great, Dr. Pisano. Thank you so much. I tell you what, you were very thorough, which is really nice. One of the questions is concerning about the TNR program. What do you do if people are against it? And we did have a comment where someone thought, that, hey, there's a lot of our towns around here that just won't go for it.
Got it. Yes, that's a great question. So it starts with educating our municipal leaders about the facts. And that's what I've been doing this week, is talking to them about the process of taking a community cat to the shelter and ... What happens is the cats left behind make bigger litters, and we didn't solve anything. So what our elected officials want is they want solutions. They want sustainable solutions. They want fiscally responsible solutions, and ones that really solve the problems. So when we tell them about the dramatic decreases in enforcement calls, and look, now your ACOs can concentrate on those cruelty cases, and maybe dogs are chained on, and suffering. So let them concentrate on true public and animal safety. And it has been incredible incredibly effective to educate them with those facts. Remember, 20 years ago, we didn't have this data. We didn't know only 2% or less of those cats were being reclaimed by their owners. But we know that when we sterilize those cats, all those nuisance behaviors go away. So it's a very data-driven conversation that we have with our municipal leaders. And I feel like we had great meetings this week, and I have high hopes for your community. And by the way, that's why I think it's so important to have a community cat coalition or somewhere that everyone in Hays County knows, oh, I got a community cat question. Let me call this number, as opposed to somebody going to animal control.
That was great. Another question that came in was asking, how do we get veterinarians involved in the community to foster in their clinic or to act as a rescue organization to take these neonatal kittens? So I'm wondering if you could also maybe share about this, the veterinary crisis that we're experiencing and how vets are having a hard time just keeping up with regular business.
Oh my goodness, it's really been difficult. And so let me start with less than 1% of all veterinarians devote their careers to sheltering. So right off the bat, shelters are behind the 8 ball. At the beginning of the pandemic, I think there was a combination of things happening. I think that there was a lot of staff that were affected. A lot of veterinary technicians and the vast majority of veterinarians today who are 20, 30, maybe in their 40s are female and have children. And that means their children were in school. So a lot of them couldn't work full time. And I think that was a big part of this. And I don't hear people talking about it. What I recommend to shelters is advertise for your full time, but make sure you have part-time opportunities or fill it with per diems, because you have to cater to those moms. Those are, that's the population of veterinarians that we need in the workforce, but we have to support them around taking care of their kids. And I think that's a big part of it. So it's very difficult right now to ask veterinarians to, I think, foster or do extra or more. I think that's a little bit of a tough sell, but I think it's a great idea, and always ask. They can only say no.
Excellent. We also had another really good question came in that is asking about transports. How do they get connected with good receiving shelters or receiving organizations? And because you always hear that dogs are wanted up north, how do they get in on that pipeline?
That's relationships. So go on your Facebook pages, join the house calls on Monday and Friday. It's all about building relationships, because you're right. In the Northeast, Northwest, and Middle United States, there are, believe it or not, puppy shortages, dog shortages, kitten shortages. I mean, it sounds crazy, and I'm sorry to tell you all this, but at least it should give you a glimmer of hope that when you set up these spay-neuter systems and pathways right, that you someday will say, boy, we really don't have that many pets in need here. Isn't that amazing? So in the meantime, get connected, join some Facebook, the Haas Facebook group, and get connected with those shelters. So that's the best way. I also want to mention Doobert.com, which is Doobert. Doobert is a network of tens of thousands of volunteers all over the country who help transport animals. So some people drive 6 hours, some people that have legs and they each drive 6 hours to get, dogs from Texas to Maine. So that's a great network as well.
Does anybody else have any last minute burning questions here?
Yeah, go ahead and unmute and feel free to turn your cameras on.
I have a few questions. I appreciate you coming and speaking today. First, the cats, I know you talked about releasing them back to their original capture location. And I know this wasn't in the slide, but maybe just in your professional experience, can you say, what are the, we measure death outcomes for cats in shelters. Is there any sort of control or measurement for death outcomes for cats who are re-released back to their capture location? I guess what I'm saying is from sort of a scientific perspective,
Yeah.
how do we know that we're not releasing them to their death? And that's why we're not recapturing them. And so you said, when we chip these cats, we never see them again. Is that because they're just dying? Is there some sort of natural population control going on?
Yeah.
Or are they just doing so well that, they're living off in nirvana somewhere and we just don't know?
Right. Great question, Hunter. Thank you for asking that. So first I think about this. Remember that pie chart I showed you, tens of millions of cats, like way over 100 million of cats that are outside. So if they're already thriving outside, they're of normal body weight, 10, 12 pounds, why do we think that if we sterilize them, that anything different is going to happen? But in Jacksonville in 2008, when they start, so the answer is no, that doesn't happen. And I'll tell you one great example is in Jacksonville in 2008, they started the program, but because people were concerned and there were naysayers, they did microchip every single cat. So that first year, 5,400 cats went through the program, and they were worried about that. Like, are they just going to be dead all over the street? Like, did we send them back to their death? And they not once got a microchipped cat back. Any DOAs were not one of those microchipped cats. So, but we do have the opposite. We have, programs that tell us, we got a call, hey, we have your cat, and they look it up, and it was a cat that they released at that location 10 years before. So my summary statement on that is cats are smarter than people, and they're thriving and doing well before they're spayed and neutered, and they're going to do well afterwards. Listen, I don't let my cats outside. I'm too paranoid, but other people do. And you know what? This is something that half of Americans do allow them outside, and there is an element of risk. Some of them are going to get hit by cars or attacked or things like that. But overall, the answer is no. We know that they're not dying in droves, because we would know that, because I think in our communities, our constituents would be outraged by that. Cameron, do you want to add anything?
I would just say that we see that all around the country. That is always the fear, and it just doesn't end up. What you actually find is more people will come out of the woodwork and tell you about the cats thriving. And when we started our program too, keep in mind, and I was in Jacksonville, Florida, our citizens would call and complain if cats looked unhealthy or unwell. And they continue to do that today because they care about them. Even though you may only hear from the people who gripe and complain about them, that's because the good people are afraid to speak up. But once they know that this is a program that's embraced by your community, they will be right there to tell you when things are good or bad, okay?
Yes, thank you. Shari, you have a question? Do you want to unmute and turn your camera on?
Sarah, there was a question that came through to clarify that these cats are being returned to where they were originally found and not relocated, correct?
Correct. But there may be instances where they need to be relocated. So if I put the cat back where they were originally found, I know like that cat knows their surroundings. But if there's some reason I can't take that cat back there, I relocate them, then that has to be coordinated with somebody, right? And the cat has to be introduced appropriately or kept in a nice area until they assimilate. So that would have to be coordinated with a person. If you took a cat and just dropped them off somewhere else, that's abandonment. Shari, did you have a question?
Yes, I would like to ask you to speak a little bit more about how much dialogue has been accomplished this week, as I've been in a lot of these meetings. I've heard over and over how refreshing it is that we're all finally communicating. So I'd like to ask for your recommendations, because I can see that the judge and several other major players, leaders in all the different entities are participating now. And once this is recorded, how we can, as a rescue community, as officials, how we can establish some type of vehicle, whether it be a separate Teams group to communicate, and also to include the communications officers. I think that Maddie Spencer is on here from the City of San Marcos Communications, but I'd like to see, hi Maddie, I love you, Maddie. I'd like to see how we get the Kyle and Wimberley. I mean, all of these public information offices need to be helping, and how can we get those people to participate, and then establish something that's an ongoing thing as we make these recommendations come to be a reality and a phased approach. We can't let this beautiful energy stop tonight. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So that's going to be up to all of you. I think that it's been such an amazing week to be meeting with the judge and the commissioners and all the municipalities and Mayor Houston today. So it's been really amazing and interesting to hear everybody's perspective. So I think that your Facebook page is probably the best place to start. I think that it would be great if you had a coalition. I wouldn't think about task force. That sounds very unproductive to me. A coalition means like we're going to get together on a regular basis, and we could do it on Zoom, and just everybody's informed and what's going on, or what do we need to do. But I would encourage you to specifically around the community cat issue, have some sort of resource so that people don't have to call enforcement in a municipality, and you will make the world of difference for those cats. But beyond that, yes, all of these issues about safety net and access to care, all those things, it would be amazing if you all had a coalition.
So it's
Somebody wanted to say something? You can unmute and talk.
I have a few more questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
When did this study, the feasibility study, begin?
So so the RFP process started back in the fall, and we were awarded probably a month ago or so. And then we arrived here this week. So we just started in Hays County on Monday, but we had done some research prior, and we've been in just a variety of meetings all week, spending time at the shelter, talking to the staff, just to learn about what's happening now and what are the numbers and what the potential numbers could be, right? So if you had the community cat program municipality wide, what that would look like. So we've been here all week until the end of the day tomorrow.
So it's about a 6 to 8 week process, give or take. Like,
from start to finish, probably. Yeah, probably. Well, but then we're going to be back to speak June 21st. So there'll be ongoing conversation.
have you guys faced any obstacles with your assessment? I mean, is anybody not granting you the appropriate access or not giving you the time of day with meetings? I mean, is anybody not playing ball?
What a great question. I have to say no. We've met with, I met with mayors and commissioners, city managers, assistant city managers. So everybody that I needed to meet with, I met with, and with Animal Arts, and the shelter was great. The staff was amazing. So we didn't have there wasn't any resistance to talking about this. And I think it's because, Hunter, what we're saying is like, this is something that the county wants to do. So what is your opinion? So that's an exciting thing,
Or yeah, I know in the past this has sometimes been sort of a lightning rod issue, and I didn't know if there was any lingering hostilities, but I'm glad to hear that you guys haven't been held up. It seems like the plan for cats is pretty well laid out and established. I feel like the plan for dogs, maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention, but it seems a little more vague. And I'm just not sure for dogs specifically, obviously, you can't just release them back to where you got them.
Right.
Is the goal to increase county throughput for dogs, or is it to reduce intake, or what is sort of the broad strokes goal for long-term solutions when it comes to dogs? Is it, do we just need to increase our capacity? Do we need to increase adoptions, or do we need to somehow reduce intake? I guess where should the focus really be on the metrics for that?
Hunter, you ask the best questions. Are you like a plant? Did somebody tell you that this is like such a good question? I spend more time on community cats because it's such an easy solution. And then dogs have more resources. And that's how I look at it. We got to get this whole cat situation, stop clogging the shelter with cats. Now for dogs, I have more opportunity to talk to you about how you can keep your dog, or how I can help you with training, or how I can help you place your dog. So it's all about safety net. It is not about bigger shelters, bigger spaces. In fact, you'll probably be surprised at our recommendations for shelter spaces, but that's because with all these proactive programs, we know that there will be very little need for dogs to come into the shelter. So 100% safety net is number one. Access to veterinary care is a part of that, right? Now, if they do, and return to home in the field, don't take these dogs 40 minutes away from their neighborhoods to a shelter where a very small percentage of the time they get reunited with their owners. So that piece of it to us is more an outreach thing. So guess what? In Memphis, that call doesn't go to enforcement. It goes to the Pet Resource Center. And they're trying to get the finder to foster. I'm not talking about dangerous dogs or a dog that's snarling or biting or whatever. I'm talking about, everybody else, because that's not the norm. Can you foster and can you walk around your neighborhood? I mean, I used to have a picture in my presentation of a little dog to remind me, my neighbors know what I do. So they're like, look, this is a lost dog. Should we take him to the shelter? I said, give him to me. I found his owner in 20 minutes. Another one, my neighbor says, my dog's lost. I said, all right, she went that way. I went that way. 5 minutes later, I found her dog. So guess what? We're already doing this. Somebody asked about Nextdoor, and can the county use Nextdoor? Municipalities are very weird about apps. So I don't know the answer to that question. That might be something if the PIO, Cameron, do you want to answer that question? And then I want to make sure I answer the rest of Hunter's question.
Typically, Nextdoor will not allow a municipality to have access to all the neighborhoods, but a workaround for that is recruiting people in each of those neighborhoods. Like, go to Nextdoor for your community. There might be like 38 neighborhoods. Then put out a plea and say, hey, who wants to volunteer for each of these neighborhoods? And then anytime a dog is picked up, say like I live in Riverside, anytime a dog picks up in Riverside, I'm going to be posting it on Nextdoor saying, hey, they just found this dog. Does anybody know who the owner is? And they've had really good success with that.
Right. So yes, that's a huge thing, is to try to reunite them in the field so that you don't have to bring them into the shelter. And then along the lines of dogs, those play groups are the number one most important thing. And guess what? My dog's from a shelter. She was like, there's no way I'm going in that play group. Like, she didn't like it. So, okay, she doesn't go in play group, but most dogs love it. And what happens? People see them playing. You get cute videos, you get cute pictures. It answers the question, do they get along with other dogs? So that means that they have a shorter length of stay and they get adopted quicker in higher numbers. So those, to answer your question, all of the things I talked about, and targeted spay neuter with those large breed dogs. If I had $1 billion, I would only sterilize large dogs because they have gigantic litters and they're the ones that are the hardest to save once they enter the shelter. So all of those things, Hunter, is what I talked about throughout the presentation. So yes, dogs and cats get equal billing, but the decreasing intake of community cats is easy.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up Memphis, because one of the things that I don't know how unique this is to Hays County, but obviously there are several different stakeholders here, and Memphis being a sort of twin cities across a state border. I wonder, when you give, I don't know how many of these presentations that you've given, but how often do communities adopt your recommendations, and how often do these municipalities and, counties implement the changes that your company recommends? I mean, is this something, are we just tilting at windmills here? And, 3 months from now, the elected officials will wash their hands of this and say, well, we got some good PR out of it, and now we don't actually have to spend the money. Like, do people actually take what you're saying and implement it in your experience?
Right.
Or-
That another great question. So I've done over 115. I can probably count three, like less than a handful that did not listen. Everyone who listens, it works universally and quicker than we even imagined. And I'll give you two examples. One is Anderson County, South Carolina, never saved more than 50% of the animals. Montgomery County, Ohio, both public shelters never saved more than 50% of the animals, both within 3 months ended euthanasia for space. So we can say with full confidence, this works if you do these programs. And guess what? Some municipalities and some shelters don't do everything all at once. Maybe they do some things over time. Every single one of them has, yes, it's been hugely successful. And that's why I wrote the playbook, because when I was public shelter director back in 2005, we didn't know all this stuff. And I mean, we didn't have these formulas. So absolutely guaranteed, we know that it works. And yes, when people listen, and also when Cameron and I started with Target Zero, we were funded, our salaries were funded, but we didn't give money to shelters. And I thought, how are we going to help anybody? Because we don't have money to give them. And it turns out we didn't need it. So when we looked at just 18 of those shelters the first couple of years, the very first year with us, we never gave them a dime. There were 47,000 less euthanasias, and that was a function of decreasing intake. So it really is remarkable to have this bird's eye view of all of these shelters and all of these systems, because that traditional system is broken and it needs to be reinvented. And we know we have the answers now. And so I feel you have a lot of momentum. All I can do, listen, I wish I had authority over everything, but I don't. I'm just making these recommendations. It's up to all of you on this call. It's up to you getting everybody fired up, going to those council meetings when these topics come up. Listen, this project is going to cost a ton of money. So if there's no public support for it, yes, it might die. So, but even so, just the community cat thing, and then again, all those other things that the San Marcos shelter is working on and has improved so much over the last several years. It's just a whole new ball game.
Yeah, and I guess my concern wasn't really with the efficacy of your recommendations, more just, how realistic is it to expect 5 different, separate, distinct governments to work together towards these solutions? I guess that's more of a concern,
Okay.
especially when they don't have a history of working together. The
Got it.
current shelter is really just a product of 2 of those governments, more or less, without much involvement from the others.
From Buda and Kyle, right? So I guess my answer is, when I got here, I did not think, all right, I want Kyle, San Marcos, Buda, and the county to all start over and have this one ordinance. I didn't do that. I went to each individual and said, here's your ordinance. I'm getting this to them next week. Here's your ordinance redlined, and I just made them all uniform. And so again, I'm speaking to each one of them individually. This is what's going to benefit your municipality. So I don't think that part of it, I mean, they don't necessarily need to work together. I mean, I would love them to, but they don't necessarily need to do it all at the same time. It's just, they need to update the ordinances. And then with respect to the new facility, the county wants to do this. Judge Becerra wants this project done. And so we are here to sort of give the best practice recommendations and try to get it in front of council. And that's why we're coming back in June.
Appreciate
So,
you,
yeah.
tailoring those recommendations, because I suspect that will be more successful the more sort of tailor-made those recommendations are. I know that you guys were contracted to provide sort of long-term solutions and long-term outlooks. Is there anything that you could say or offer as far as recommendations for short-term solutions? Because I don't know if you saw that email from this morning, but you know, these recommendations aren't going to help the dogs in the shelter now. Is there anything we can do as a sort of Band-Aid fix while we wait for these longer-term recommendations to sort of take effect?
Yeah, so your shelter is already doing a lot of safety net and intake diversion and triage. We've spent a lot of time with the shelter staff this week and leadership with respect to recommendations. So yeah, there's a lot of things that can happen that can change what's happening at the shelter. So with population management, with, you know, one of the things that I really want to see with the city of San Marcos is every shelter must have control over their social media, and they need to be posting cute videos and posting pictures, but they don't have control over that. That's at the city level. So that's one thing that we would love to see. But so yeah, we are also weaving into this report the different recommendations that you just heard about for the shelter. So there are a lot of things that can be done now. And I talked about all of them. So not holding until the spay neuter appointment, doing foster to adopt, getting them into foster so that they have that adoption pathway. And then we do have a lot of connections, and I did reach out to a foundation that's helping with transport, who connected Christy and Darien to some other shelters, and they're talking about transports because of the overcrowding. And I said, please help. This is a desperate situation. So yeah, we're kind of working all angles here. Yeah.
Dr. Pisano, Lauren has a question. Lauren, if you want to unmute,
Sure.
you can ask your question.
Hi, Dr.
Hi.
Pisano.
Hi.
I represent PALS, and I haven't had a chance
Awesome.
to talk to you. My question is, what do you consider high volume?
High volume spay neuter, to me, what Cameron says and what I say might be different. But if I was in surgery, it's 40 animals a day. If Cameron is at First Coast, no lie, their surgeons do 60 animals a day. But I think,
But is that how many days a week?
I mean, no, it's all different. I just define it by day, like high volume. So I don't think there's an actual number.
So PALS actually does about 35 on average on our TNR dates that we've already committed with Dr. Bruce. We do over 50. So I just wanted you to realize that we do have a high volume clinic in Hays County that just needs to be utilized more. I'd love to have the opportunity to talk about exactly our numbers and what we've done. And Dr. Bruce and I would like to sit down and have that discussion, because we would also like to incorporate other counties or other municipalities in the county.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's on our radar, but I just want to don't discount that we don't have a high volume here. We did 2,000 last year, just without our nonprofit status, which
You
we
can
have
never
back.
have enough. You can never have enough spay neuter. It is phenomenal that you have it. In the
110%.
that I worked at, we were doing 25,000 surgeries a year, 6 days a week. It was never enough, right? Like we needed to run 24 hours, and we weren't the only clinic in town. There were others doing it as well. So listen, we are grateful you are there, but just know there should be 100 of you, right?
Yeah.
And
You need more. Yeah. I appreciate so much what you're doing. And Cameron, she's talking about Dr. Amanda Bruce.
So
Right?
what,
Yeah.
so what I'm trying to say is we have the equipment and we have the staff. We don't have an extra doctor, but we are willing to go ahead and move forward with as much as that. We just don't have the doctors right now. I'm working
Yeah.
with 5 because we're also offering a low cost vaccination clinic to try and hit the microchips. We are the lowest out of, we undercut Emancipet. We undercut anybody who's doing what we're doing. And most of what we do is probably free vouchers. So there is no excuse for our community to not get in, and we get them in as fast as we can. So what PALS is needing is support. We have the equipment, we have the space, and we're ready to go. We just need more support as far as just medical veterinarian.
Yeah.
And so the goal for us would be is to pay for a full-time vet, which we're ready to go for it. We just need to find them.
Right. Yeah.
My biggest issue, I think that is going to be hard for a shelter vet for what they are wanting to pay right now, because even incoming brand new vets are not going to take a shelter job for that price.
Right.
So I'm
Yes,
just-
I've had those
I'm-
conversations.
I'm
with
putting that out there right now, but I would like to have a sit down with you and our current vet board, Dr. Revis, who works for Firehouse, and Dr. Bruce. We have huge goals and lots of ideas that we have not been able to sit down and talk with you about.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. You've been on my
how-
list. Yeah.
but PALS is actually doing, I mean, we're pushing as hard as we can,
I know you are. Yeah.
and we're working with the shelter in conjoining with them for when they have dire straits and they didn't get a vet in for 2 weeks. We just did on a Sunday 35 animals to get them off the floor. So we support the shelter 110%. So just know that that's
Yes, they do. And they do appreciate you. So thank you for saying
Yeah.
that, Lauren. I didn't mean to overshadow your good work. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Well, listen, I really appreciate, we had 38 people in the meeting. So that was exciting.
I've had my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kelly. I'm so sorry. Go-
Ignored.
Hi, Kelly.
No,
Oh,
you're
go ahead.
fine. You're fine. I put something in the chat finally, but you're gonna see all those comments about lost and found pets of Hayes, and I do run that with another superstar, Kathleen out of Wimberley. I'm in San Marcos. And I just wanted to kind of make a point. Cameron brought up, you know, the kind of like the workaround for next door. We cover the whole county. We have 2 people on every single city next door within my group. We keep hundreds of animals out of the San Marcos Regional Animal Shelter every single year. We're so busy, I don't even keep stats, and I'm going to start doing that because I think it's really important to kind of be able to put, you know, something up. We have a great community support. We have people that will foster animals instead of them going to the shelter. You know, we've got Mayor Houston and Judge Becerra's support. I have met with them both. And we do really work with as a whole county, not just, you know, certain cities. So, you know, we've got good relationships with some of the APOs that are in touch with me via cell, and sometimes animals aren't even leaving their trucks. We're finding
That's
their
awesome.
yeah.
That's
So,
awesome.
you know, we've got a microchip scanning program. We just Paws on the Ground, which is a great resource for us. Just bought our group 5 more scanners. So I think that makes like 12. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there that, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. The
Right.
next door thing, we probably reunite more pets on Nextdoor than we do Facebook. So just
Yeah.
kind of, you know, I think we can probably do better with the partnership with the shelter. So, you know, just encourage that, and we can only get stronger.
Callie, thank you so much for bringing that up. And just want to mention that my presentation is a generic best practice presentation. So just know I wasn't insinuating all this great work wasn't done in Hayes County. I know there's a lot. That's why I'm saying, oh my gosh, there's so many great groups. And that's why it's exciting to have a coalition. But that presentation for you is just supposed to be generic. So thanks, Kelly, for
You're great. No, this has
correct.
been, this
Because
has
that
been
was a
wonderful.
question, yeah, that I had received. So thanks for saying that.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Thank you.
All right.
If
Well,
if I just could, one last question. I know we've taken up a lot of your time.
Sure.
So you come from a pretty fantastic academic pedigree. It looks like you've been involved in academia for quite some time, and now at UF Health. One thing that might distinguish Hayes County from some of y'all's previous contracts would be our substantial student body population. It's something on the order of like 1 in 7 county residents is a student at Texas State University. And there is no shortage of support for this project among the student population. And if Judge Becerra is still here, I'm sure he could attest to that. When it came to just getting this RFP approved, I did one day out at a tailgate and was able to get over 100 signatures in favor of getting this RFP passed. But a lot of
Thank
students
you.
simply didn't know about the shelter or about the problem of, the current issues that the shelter was facing. And I worry maybe that is just sort of an untapped pipeline or a resource in the county. So I wondered if y'all's feasibility study, I guess, sort of looked at, how we could incorporate the university population more, because most of the people my age that I know adopted their dogs when they were in college, and they still have their dogs today.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how we could bring the university into this project as well.
yeah. So yeah, we have worked in a lot of university towns as well. And so we're not going to speak specifically to that in the feasibility study, except to say this, that animal welfare in general, as an industry and in Hayes County and everywhere else, needs to release judgment and bias against anybody. And so there is some bias about college students not being responsible. So we always want to say, like, well, what can we have them help us? Well, fosters, or like you said, I mean, a lot of your friends adopted in college, and could they volunteer? They could foster. They're amazing on social media. They can get content out. I mean, there's a million things to do, but I think it's just in general, we have very strong opinions about different groups of people, and that then cuts off our potential to really collaborate and work together. And I'll tell you an interesting story. In the beginning of the pandemic, Greater Good, I don't know if anybody remembers hashtag stay home and foster, because they were trying to get, like we're all in quarantine at home. And so go foster a pet from a shelter. 80,000 people responded like that. And the demographic with the highest response rate were under 34 years of age. And 40% of them said they'd take large dogs, including pit bulls, right? But we're not marketing to those people. We're not marketing to the younger generations, right? So we learned a lot, and we're always trying to preach and teach to release those bias against, whether it's college kids or an older person adopting or whoever. Let's just release all the bias and judgment and try to help everybody.
Well, that's great to hear. I hope to see some sort of marketing recommendations in the study. But thank you again so much for your time.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I appreciate it. Good night. Thank you, Cameron.
Well done. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Oh, thank you, Judge Becerra. Oh my gosh, I didn't ask you if you wanted to say anything. I'm sorry.
Don't worry about a thing. There's no way on the planet I could have added anything more than what you've already done. You were magnificent. You were on point, and you are such a breath of fresh air that we as a whole community need. And I'm just so grateful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll see you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.